There are 7 main parts called articles in the Constitution. We'll cover the last 3 of them first. Article 7 has only 24 words. It says the Constitution goes into effect when 9 of the 13 states ratify it. Delaware was the first. New Hampshire was the 9th. Rhode Island was the 13th, which is not surprising in that Rhode Island did not even participate in the Constitutional Convention. Article 6 isn't a whole lot longer, and basically says that debts and such incurred by the previous government, meaning the Articles of Confederation, are accepted by the new government. Seemingly no big deal. However, there is a little phrase in the second clause of Article 6, which possibly the drafters of the Constitution might have viewed as just totally logical and no big deal. But in essence, it says that the U.S. Constitution and the federal laws that get passed and treaties that might get approved, quote, shall be the supreme law of the land, end quote, regardless of anything that a state constitution or state laws may later say. Wow! It has become known as the Supremacy Clause, and although it is still argued in the courts, those 8 words are among the most powerful in the Constitution. And Article 5 explains how the Constitution can be amended. Typically, that takes approval by 2/3 of both the U.S. House and Senate, then ratification by 3/4 of the state's legislatures. Not an easy process. But it can also be done if 3/4 of the states hold conventions for ratification of an amendment, bypassing recorded votes by the state legislators. That method has only been used once, for the repeal of prohibition.
Well, they used it that way at that time because the Congress and most of the state legislatures were dry, meaning nobody wanted to go on record as saying they were supporting bringing back alcohol, although they might have, shared a beer talking about it someplace. They weren't willing to go on record as doing that. And so the mechanism used was Constitutional Convention, which proposed it and got it through.
And another element of Article 5 says that until 1808, 20 years hence, there can be no constitutional amendment prohibiting slavery. This isn't the only place where the subject of slavery is addressed. Now let's jump back up to Article 1, the legislative branch, which is the longest and most complex part of the Constitution. A lot of it includes basic things we all know. There will be a House of Representatives with 2-year terms and a U.S. Senate with 6-year terms. Each state gets only 2 senators, but there will be 1 House member for every 30,000 citizens based on a census every 10 years. Now, pause here for a moment. This got changed later, but if today it was still 1 representative for each 30,000 people, the U.S. Congress would have 10,000 members. The House has been capped at 435, and with 50 states, we have 100 senators. The members of the House and Senate choose their own leaders, except the Vice President of the United States is technically the presiding officer of the Senate. Vice Presidents almost never show up to play that role because they only get to vote in case of a tie. Impeachment is an interesting element. The House of Representatives can bring impeachment against an official. That would be like a prosecutor filing a charge against someone. Then the Senate tries the case. They act as a jury. If convicted, the official is tossed out of office. 2 presidents have been impeached, Andrew Johnson in the 1860s and Bill Clinton in the 1990s. Neither was convicted. Article 1 also says the Congress makes its own rules, has to keep a journal, that members get paid, and that they cannot be sued for anything they say in debate. Congress has the sole authority to appropriate money, and such bills must originate in the House, not the Senate. The legislative branch is to provide for the common defense and general welfare, and has the authority to borrow money on the credit of the United States. We sure know about that one. It also says when a bill is passed by both houses, they must send it to the President. He can sign it into law or return it with his objections. The word veto does not appear in the Constitution. Someone came up with that word later. Congress can also make laws on bankruptcy, coin money, and regulate its value, fix weights and measures, punish counterfeiting, promote science and the arts, allow for patents and copyrights, establish post offices and postal roads, create lower courts, and fight and punish piracy. And very significantly, it can lay and collect taxes. Let's look at one of the most controversial provisions, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. It reads, "The Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes." Likely in 1787, that didn't seem controversial at all. But let's focus on the phrase that really created issues. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states. The way this has been interpreted over the years is that any kind of commerce activity, meaning business, buy, sell, or transport something, that involves two or more states can be regulated by acts of Congress. In the 1960s, aside from the moral arguments, much of the constitutional authority cited for congressional action in the civil rights field was based on the Commerce Clause. It was sometimes argued that if you or your business even received mail from another state, you were engaged in interstate commerce and therefore subject to regulation. A Bill of Attainder, a favorite trick of old Henry VIII in England, was where he'd make Parliament pass a law to punish one specific person. Remember how he wanted to get rid of his wife, Anne Boleyn? I think he had Parliament vote that she was guilty of treason, which she wasn't, and they cut her head off. Our Constitution says laws here have to apply the same to everyone. Let's talk military. Congress can provide and maintain a Navy. Okay, a Navy requires a lot of effort and expense to build ships, etc., so they went along with a full-time Navy. But on the ground, an Army, their attitude was more a matter of as needed. The Constitution says they can call forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Militias were state level, like the modern-day National Guard. Remember, the founders were not big fans of a big permanent standing army. The Constitution says Congress has, quote, "the authority to raise and support armies," end quote. It goes on to say that appropriation of money for such armies shall not be for a longer term than 2 years. That makes a point. But go back to the actual language. It says, authority to raise and support armies. Plural, armies, implying armies as needed. Not a big permanent military industrial complex army, but armies as needed. Well, today people won't argue to get rid of the U.S. Army, but the founders were quite wary of a big permanent military, which around the world, through history, have tended to overthrow civilian governments. Article 1 also includes some things that a state government may not do. Among these are, they cannot issue their own money, they cannot make their own treaties with other states or other nations, they cannot engage in a war unless it's part of a U.S. war, except if they happen to be invaded by someone. They cannot grant any titles of nobility on a person, but then neither can the United States government.